Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
How are you doing, Matt?
I am hanging in there. How are you doing, Bill?
I'm fine. Um, let's just address the elephant in the room.
You want
Uh,
me to say it?
would you rather I say it or you say it? What's going to go down easier for you?
Well, no, I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but you were right. Once again,
Ugh.
I don't know when this happened at a certain, because you haven't always been the best predictor, but I feel like you've had a run of a year or two now where you have nailed it, your predictions. So we've been doing this for God
I
knows
think
how
more
many
than a
years.
year. I think more than a year, Matt. Let's go. It starts May 2019. May 2019 is when I wrote for Politico that Joe Biden was in the driver's seat in the Democratic primary, that the Democratic electorate matched what he was offering when nobody else was saying that. That's what
Wow.
that's when it begins, Matt.
It could be. I mean, I do know that this is ancient history. I know my 2016 predictions were better
Yes.
than yours,
I
but
had
that was
I had the worst, Hillary Jeb take in Politico in 2015 before Trump even came down the elevator. So that was my low point. But I've
but it
been
sounds like
redeemed.
you've had like a 5-year run then, if based on this. I mean, time flies. But anyway, allow me to say congratulations. Just for people who aren't following, I predicted that Trump would not win Iowa and New Hampshire,
You thought he would lose
and
one.
that he would lose one of the two, and I thought it would be New Hampshire, and that did not happen. Bill, you were right. I was wrong. Um, Luckily, we did not bet anything,
This is
so
when
I
I
don't have to
only
humiliate
win when
myself.
I bet. When I actually bet, that's when it all goes wrong.
All right, next time I'll get you betting by the end of the day,
What,
as
what
Jim
was
Carrey
what's
might say.
weird, I don't think I was making a daring prediction here, Matt. I was making the most conventional possible prediction one could come up with based on the available data. But there was this weird, and I'm not trying to put this on you, Matt, but I feel like in a lot of the commentary and reporting, I'm mostly getting CNN. That's what I have in my AirPods when I'm walking the dog generally. Um, I felt there was a lot of Nikki Haley wish casting out there. Like I felt with you, like you made that prediction, way back,
Yeah, yeah.
and then
No, I was sort of like, if you picked the Buffalo Bills to win the Super Bowl in August,
yeah,
you would have stuck with them against the Chiefs this weekend, even if you kind of thought the Chiefs were going to win. You would have stuck with it because, hey, I made that. So yeah,
right.
you're right. That's kind of where I was. In fact, I wrote a column. I think on the eve of New Hampshire, where I said I wouldn't bet on Nikki, but I would vote for her.
Right.
So something
Right.
like that.
Whereas I feel like in the last 2 weeks, there was a lot of hyperventilating that this could really happen. New Hampshire, it always bucks tradition. There's always independence. Chris Christie dropped out, and I just there was lots of data going the other way that I thought the professionals were just ignoring
Yeah.
because
But
they're
I
just
will say, I think,
so badly.
I am more kind of romantic and than you are in this sense. And I have seen Obama in '08 kind of collapse, and Hillary comes out, it surprises everybody and wins New Hampshire, and McCain in 2000 and in 2008. Um, Certainly in 2008, it was a surprise. I mean, McCain had been left for dead at a certain point during that race, and it was a huge comeback, and he wins New Hampshire.
The
And
comeback had
so,
happened that he had already come back in the polling before election day. He wasn't behind on election day.
as I recall, now the Hillary one was a
Hillary
real
is
surprise.
Hillary is the one example of the entire history of the New Hampshire primary where not only was she behind in the polling on election day, but had no momentum leading into in the polling leading into
Right.
election day. There are other cases where people were behind. Gary Hart 84, uh, George H.W. Bush, 88, or most polling. In the Hillary case, what happened was 3 days before the election was the debate when Barack Obama has that patronizing "you're likable enough" comment. And it was one day before where Hillary's at a campaign stop and she gets a little teary and says, "This is very personal to me." And, a huge women driven backlash occurs that happens too late for the polls to capture. But in this, and look, you could argue Haley overperformed relative to polling averages. There was something that happened that the polling didn't pick up, which I think was a lot of more Democratic, Biden leaners or actual Biden voters who are like, I just don't want Donald Trump, but I'm going to.
Well, I do think Nikki closed strong, and when I say closed, I mean literally like the last day or two.
Yeah.
She finally tightened her message, and in fact, her we'll call it a concession speech, was the best I've ever seen her ever. And of course, it was ironic that she would deliver her sharpest critique of Donald Trump, and I think she looked great. I think she seemed very relaxed, and it's ironic, of course, that it would come after it doesn't matter.
But,
But
but
too little, too late.
Haley's best is still not that good. She's still.
No, this was. Did you see it, Bill? Did you see the
Yeah, I
concession?
saw it.
No, that was good. That was legit good.
I'm generally just meh. Whenever I say Haley, I'm just like meh. And part of the problem is that the basic message that she is saying, one, it's incongruous from the results. It's heavy spin. I mean, look, Bill Clinton did the whole comeback kid bit when he came in second in New Hampshire, which quite frankly was BS. It was not that impressive a victory. And the only reason why it sort of goes down in lore as his great speech is that there were a whole bunch of Southern primaries coming up that they're very well suited to him. So he has had to sort of maintain viability to get there because Paul Tsongas wasn't really primed to do well in Georgia, for example. But the absolute best New Hampshire concession speech of all time is Barack Obama's "Yes We Can" speech. You don't even remember this was a concession speech because it was so amazing and had nothing to do with the results. There wasn't an electability argument there. He just had an actual vision that had resonance that he was going to deliver regardless of the circumstances. And Haley just does not have that.
I think Nikki Haley gave a great speech, a concession speech. But look, it's a moot point. It doesn't matter. Before we turn to what does this all mean, and does she even have a chance? Will she make it to South Carolina? All that. I want to go back to your predictive powers, Bill.
Okay, please.
Because I feel like now maybe it started in 2018 in terms of getting on this roll, but I feel like you early on detected that Trump was going to be the Republican nominee. And as you noted, some people were still clinging to hope as recently as still today. But you were quick to say DeSantis doesn't have what it takes. You were ahead of the curve. I think you were exactly right. Talk, if you would, just about that.
Well,
not DeSantis, but seeing that Trump was going to win.
But I wasn't saying that at the beginning of the year. I didn't believe that. And I still don't. I don't believe he was preordained from the beginning. And I've seen people knock me over the course of the last several months. These Democrats, they want it to be Trump. They're saying these things because they want it. They don't want you to take Haley seriously or DeSantis seriously because they want Biden to have the weakest nominee. My argument early on was it is not settled whether the Republican Party is Trump's party. There is some conflicting data here, and it's uphill to dislodge Trump, but he sagged in trial heat polling after the midterm. He fell below 50%. There was a clear divide on Ukraine that I think at the start of the year was more 50-50. And so there was a path to take that would try to unite those old school national security conservatives with those who were becoming unsure about Trump's own electability. But I did think it required a frontal assault.
Yeah.
You couldn't tap dance around it. Uh, and
That's a good point, Bill. DeSantis, remember he said that Ukraine's not in our strategic interest.
right.
Like, Nikki ended up, of course, being a strong defender of Ukraine, but she didn't have the capacity to bring in the MAGA populist folks.
Well, I
What
mean,
if DeSantis had staked out Ukraine, for example, try to keep people like me in the fold, but also brought in some former Trump voters who are kind of ready to move on, right? Maybe that's what.
I think he had to do everything. I mean, Christie was the closest to what I thought should happen, but he was by himself, and he was
It
the
was a
worst,
bad vessel.
the bad vessel. He'd already lost a lot of. He lost credibility with Republicans when he hugged Obama at Hurricane Sandy. Like his favorability amongst Republicans was rock bottom. So by himself he was no good. Now, if he was tip of the spear, and then 20 other people came behind him, then maybe that could have been something. But Haley was good on Ukraine, but still very hesitant to go at Trump directly. DeSantis was trying to be Trump 2.0. And say, I'm Trump without the baggage. I'm the more competent Trump. And beyond the people actually running, there's no reinforcement on the broader party. I think you needed just a massive team effort to puncture the conservative media echo chamber. So the median Republican voter is not just hearing from people they are skeptical of and suspicious of, but people that they trust saying,
Well, that was never going to happen, Bill. I
well,
mean, it's
that's
far
the
fetched enough to. I mean, I think it's difficult enough to imagine Republicans to be courageous and bold and like if that was going to happen, then they would have done that already, right? They would have done that. They would have voted to convict him, and he wouldn't even be eligible to
well,
run,
this is
right? So,
why.
I mean,
But there was a moment, December to February, December 22 to February 23, when Republicans were definitely angry about the midterms. And,
yes,
and maybe not so openly, but angry that Trump foisted horrible nominees on them in key races. If it was going to
Herschel
happen,
Walker.
it had to happen there. And so by the
Yeah,
time we get to April, when I wrote my DeSantis piece, this is after the Alvin Bragg indictment over the Stormy Daniels hush payments, where almost all Republicans rallied around Trump. Uh, that was when I really tipped over and was like, okay, if you're not going to do
yeah.
this, it's just going to be him. Like, why bother running and humiliate yourself if this is how you're going to do it?
And this is an example of why having these discussions are so helpful for me, because you really talked me into DeSantis can't win. I wrote a piece in May, which was still but well before Trump, I'm sorry, well before DeSantis officially announced, echoing you declaring DeSantis should not run. But it was because you and I had had that discussion,
Yeah.
and I think you were really ahead of the curve. I was still ahead of the curve because we had hashed that out. But I remember being initially thinking you were wrong about DeSantis. But the more you looked at it, the more I open mindedly looked at what you said. It became pretty clear.
Well, there was an argument that this is your moment. It may not be a lock, but you got to strike with the irons hot. You have this great reelection campaign. You're crushing it with the legislature. If you wait, you'll beat Chris Christie, and it will be pathetic if you try 4 years later. And I'm not saying like it was a given he would be the nominee in 2028. I mean, there's risks wherever you go, but it just seemed to me like DeSantis had already done the book tour. He did the book tour at the end of February, and it was hit with the indictment guy in the middle of it. And people were saying, well, this is an indictment, but once we get past this one, he'll have a shot. Or the other indictments will be worse. It'll be January 6th, the classified docs. So those will be different. And I was like, you're just not getting it. You have to even if the Stormy Daniels one wasn't the greatest indictment, like you got to build. It's such a challenge. It
Yeah,
requires.
beating Trump is, um, he is way more resilient, and I'll use magical. Or he is hard to kill politically, and there might have been 2 or 3 moments in the past 8 years when he was down, and if they kicked him when he was down, maybe, but they always gave him a hand up, right?
And
They always helped him back up.
that's why you have to
Whether
have,
it's Kevin McCarthy going to Mar-a-Lago, it's Mitch McConnell not even voting
yeah. You
to
need all that
convict him.
reinforcement.
It's Ron DeSantis defending him, saying that it's the politicization of the Justice Department and the legal system coming after indicting him.
Yeah, I mean, think what would happen if, I mean, in a normal circumstance, if a candidate is getting indicted for anything. I mean, I grant you that the Story Daniels thing is not as
You
severe.
wouldn't even need the indictment. The scandal alone would have
Well,
taken
exactly,
down any
exactly,
other politician.
exactly. I mean, we have a Virginia state legislative candidate who had consensual sex online and lost a swing district, large, a very, very close race, but it probably would have won that race if not for that one really minor scandal. This is the titular leader of your party who made hush money payments for an affair with a porn star so he could win an election in 2016.
And by the way, his base are evangelical Christians.
Yes. Think what would happen if the entirety of the Republican Party in March said, uh, I don't know if this indictment is going to lead to a conviction or not, but this is a morally flawed person. This will not be the last indictment. We need to have a campaign that focuses on Biden's failed record and not a immoral leader of our own party. And we need to band together and give someone with a clean slate a chance.
Yeah.
If it was not just Chris Christie saying that, but it was if it was McConnell and McCarthy and Lindsey Graham and Matt Gaetz, if everyone was doing it, like even if you were listening to Steve Bannon's podcast or Fox News and Newsmax, like you wouldn't be able to ignore that. It would be in the conservative dialogue. It would just be a totally different dynamic, but that requires a lot of coordination and courage, which is clearly,
No.
very, very limited in the Republican Party right now.
And I mean, for good reason, because Trump just keeps winning. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. He wins because you thought he was going to win, because you were afraid to challenge him, because he always wins, so he always wins, so you're afraid to challenge him, and it's now a vicious cycle. But I do want to say this, and I don't want to shift the blame. Republicans own this guy, and he owns them. But I do think if it was perceived that the Democratic nominee was a more formidable, vigorous opponent, then it's possible that the electability argument might have had more weight. That
Well,
Nikki
sure.
or
Here's where Haley's other problems. She had a theory of the case that I think was baked in a year ago that she didn't deviate from, regardless of external circumstances. I need to make this a two-person race. I need to make it about electability. Well, Trump's beating Biden in most national polling. Well, I beat him by more. Okay, in this one poll from early December, I got 4 other polls here that show Trump doing better than you versus Joe Biden. What? I can't hear you. It's a two-person race. I'm better than Trump against Biden. Elective anything that's poll based is at risk, is vulnerable to shifting polls. It's not rooted in something more.
how in the hell could it be that Donald Trump, after 4 indictments, being found liable for sexual assault by a jury of his peers, inciting a riot, how could it be that not only is this guy poised to be the Republican nominee, he's also beating Joe Biden in national polls, not just Republican polls?
Well,
So wouldn't it be nice if Nikki didn't have to bullshit And if she could actually say, oh, by the way, Trump is going to lose in November, therefore you must elect me or
Well,
nominate me.
I'm just saying a presidential candidate needs more than that. I mean, Biden was able to make an electability argument in 2020, uh, but he also had to say my healthcare plan for a public option is more realistic than Medicare for all. Uh, he needed to have some direct pushback to the main utopian ideas that are being put forth from the more left wing candidates, uh, which weren't in odds with the electability argument, but part and parcel of. It wasn't strictly like look at the poll numbers, I win. I think as in and of itself that wouldn't have been sufficient. I don't think the poll numbers were that stark between him and any other candidates, depending on what poll you were looking at. But he had to make an argument that was attached to it that said, "I have
Yeah, but I also think Democrats were so afraid of Trump, and they were willing to do whatever it took, even if that meant nominating an old white dude who's a moderate who used to hang out with segregationists. They were willing to do it because Trump was so evil and beating him was so important. I don't think Republicans have the same sense that Biden is that formidable or that.
feeling. I mean, or that being a moderate makes me a better candidate, will make me better at governing. You're mad about me hanging with segregationists? Well, I'm doing great with African American voters in South Carolina, so I've just negated that argument. Like, there's things he could put on the table that say, I like, don't vote for me because I'm a secret racist. Vote for me because I actually have a track record of bringing black and white voters together. Like he had substantive things to put on the table, and I mean, Haley has certain wisps of that, but I don't think it really gelled into like I'm more electable because
Yeah.
I support X, Y, and Z.
Well, one thing we know about the Republican Party is they do not care about um, passing the torch to a new generation. They sure as heck don't care about
Well,
that,
some of the Democrats.
and I don't think they care at all about optics or niceties. I mean, they want Barabbas, as I wrote in my column. Let me ask you this, Bill. As we so Nikki gave that, I think, very good concession speech. And she said we're going to South Carolina, New Hampshire's maybe it's the first, it's not the last kind of thing. Do you think she actually makes it to South Carolina, her home state? It could be embarrassing to lose your home state. Does she make it all the way? And is there a chance? She's down 30 points or something in South Carolina. Two-part question. Will she actually make it, and does she even have a chance there?
Well, the answer to your second one, I think, is no. South Carolina is not. I mean, North New Hampshire was as good a state for Haley as you could possibly come up with, and she still lost. Maybe overperformed a bit, but still lost. South Carolina, Republican primary, deeply conservative, much more religious, and it may be her state, but there's nothing in the polling to suggest she gets that much of a home state bump there. I mean, it's just the same way like Marco Rubio couldn't beat Donald Trump in Florida in 2016. Like, that doesn't matter.
Bill, it still bothers me that a state being very conservative and deeply religious guarantees Trump wins.
I mean,
No,
Trump
I'm not disputing it. You're exactly right.
Yeah.
But it bothers me because a real conservative who is truly devoutly religious should vote for Nikki Haley over Donald Trump.
I mean, perhaps it is not for me to say, as a non-believer, but it seems to me that Trump has infected the evangelical community, has changed the nature of their religious relationship. But
or he has benefited from that trend that was already underway, or they were never who I thought they were. And by the way, let me just say, I mean, this isn't about me. That doesn't in any way impact my belief in
course.
Burkean conservatism or Jesus
Mhm.
at all, but it does depress me and and about my fellow man in some cases.
Well, I don't want to belabor that point. But I'm going to get to your other question. Does
Yes,
Haley make
please,
it?
please.
Does Haley make it to South Carolina? I mean, on one hand, that is strictly her personal decision. You know, if she wants to limp into South Carolina, even though everyone around her says that she shouldn't, and that she's down to her last dime, if she wants to, make her last stand there, she can. But I suspect that the money is going to dry up. That people around her are going to say there's no path for you. It's a month away. It's not like it's next week. So it's a lot of living off the land if you don't have the money to pay
Yeah,
staff.
and in between, she's going to lose Nevada.
Yeah, but she said her speech next day is South Carolina. Like, no, it's not. It's Nevada, and you don't even bother to put your name in contention for the caucus because there's a weird thing going on there where there's a caucus and a primary, but the primary is a beauty
Yeah,
contest with no delegates.
no, but it's even worse than that, Bill. She could lose she's on the primary ballot,
Right,
which is gives you no delegates, but
right.
she's on the primary ballot. She's the only person on the primary ballot, but she could lose to none of the above.
Like Nevada's got that thing there.
So
Um,
she could not only lose the caucuses, I believe, where
yeah,
the delegates are awarded. She's not even competing there, so she will certainly will lose that. But she could actually lose the primary to none of the above. So that would be, I think, a pretty embarrassing. That would be almost a Dean
maybe
Phillips.
they'll
Is that the guy's
accelerate the
name?
process here, but I mean, Ron DeSantis after Iowa, you guys punched my ticket, and then 5 days later he was out. So it's
They
one thing to
punched
be
his
kind of.
nose. Is what they
What's that?
punched. They punched his nose.
That's right. That's right. So it's one thing to be riding that crowd high the night of a primary, but reality is going to set in pretty fast, and it's only going to be so. It's only a question of like how stubborn is she and how much humiliation can she take, and I'm not one to believe that she can take all that much humiliation. So my guess is she does drop out before South Carolina.
Tim Scott was on stage. Don't know if you have any thoughts about. I mean,
But they're
look, it's been
all
Tim
debasing
Scott,
themselves.
Nancy Mace, uh, two candidates that I think Nikki Haley appointed Tim Scott. Nancy Mace is her representative in Congress. It's not great.
Let's start with the Democrats, though. What do you think
Okay.
about Dean Phillips getting? I think last look he was like at 19. It was ticking down a little bit as the votes were trickling in, but in the vicinity of 20%. Do you think that has any great meaning going forward?
Obviously, I haven't been following this as closely, but as the Republicans, but I see this as a win for Joe Biden, right?
Yeah.
First of all, Biden and the Democrats offended New Hampshire.
Yeah.
um, and Biden still won without even being on the ballot. He won a write-in, I would say pretty convincingly. So based on what I know, you follow this more closely than I do, Bill. I feel like this is probably a good sign for Joe Biden. Oh, and by the way, let me go back real quick and say I agree with something you said earlier, which is I think in 2016, Obama and Democrats actually did boost Trump's chances. I think they thought Trump would be easier to beat.
Hmm.
I do not think they did that intentionally this time.
Hmm.
I think they're gonna they're certainly pivoting, and they're going to they'll find a way. Uh, Trump is a target-rich environment for Democrats. I do not think they intentionally boosted Trump this time around.
So right now,
Not intentionally, even though the indictment did did
well,
seal
I
the deal.
interested that Biden came with a statement last night saying it's going to be Trump. Like he could have hung back and like let him fight it out for some more.
Yeah.
But like they are prepared for a general election campaign. I think they believe that once Americans believe Trump is the nominee, that might change these general election polls. That
Well, I keep hearing, because I listen to approximately 5 hours of podcasts a day, so I can't keep it all straight. I keep hearing smart pollsters and people say the American public doesn't realize that it's actually going to be Trump versus Biden yet.
Right, right.
I find that hard to believe, but that's what they keep saying.
Right. I mean, I think probably there's some data that's been taken to suggest that, um, and we'll see if it makes that much difference in trial heat polling. But I think the Biden campaign thinks once everyone sees unequivocally that this is the choice, our numbers are going to go up. So they don't see the value in having more Haley Trump bloodletting. And I don't know if that's right, because I do think one thing that Haley has done, I wrote about this today, my post New Hampshire take up at the Washington Monthly. I think ageism is the big loser here. Both Haley and Phillips had ageist arguments, explicitly so. These people are too old to be president. I mean, Haley was like, everybody knows, every doctor will tell you at a certain age there is decline, which of course is literally not true. There's no exact age where we all decline. It's different for every individual. Um, but they both said things like that explicitly, and I think neither one attached that to things that were substantive. So, Nikki Haley said, uh, we don't want more of the same of these two. We want to go forward. Well, to a Republican, Donald Trump is going forward. The things that Donald Trump did in office, they like. They're not doing the DeSantis thing of saying, well, he didn't get this bill passed or that bill passed. That's not what they care about. They care about the attitude that he brought to the office, the fights that he picked. In their mind, that's going forward. And Dean Phillips said similar things, but to the average Democrat, Dean Phillips said early on, Biden did a spectacular job. This is not the past; it's about the future. Biden is doing a spectacular job in the present to the average Democrat, and past things like infrastructure investment, semiconductor manufacturing, clean energy investment. This is all future-oriented policy. So, like, that argument doesn't make any sense to a Democrat. And this is why ageism by itself isn't as potent as people think.
Well,
But
I think that the polls would tell you that it works and resonates, but it has not performed. It has not passed the ballot test. It has not worked when old people are on the ballot. They tend to do pretty well, except Bob Dole, who
would
tried
you
to build
vote
a
for?
bridge to the past.
But in the case of Bob Dole, I mean, the Clintonites threw some, passive aggressive ageism towards him, but the backdrop was still Clinton was running over a booming economy. So, Dole saying, where's the outrage, doesn't land. Clinton can argue, I'm doing future oriented things based on my record. So it wasn't like ageism saved him from an otherwise pending defeat. He was going to win anyway. So we don't have any example, and it's not like it hasn't been tried before. We don't have any example where a presidential candidate loses because of age-related attacks who any reasonable person said would have otherwise won. Stevenson tried it on Eisenhower. Mondale tried it on Reagan, but Eisenhower had a good economy,
but it is true. Even if overt ageist attacks do not work or haven't been demonstrated to work electorally, parties until recently have tended to want to move forward generationally, not backward. I mean, we're still, electing baby boomers and the silent generation.
Silent. Biden's older than Bill Clinton.
And so if I'm Nikki Haley and you're like, I'm trying to beat a guy who's effectively an incumbent, where are the credible contrasts? I mean, I think age is an obvious, it is not just age, it's about, cognitive abilities and energy. And, now it's hard to run against Trump on energy because he kind of has a lot of it. But I think the age thing is an obvious, maybe you don't. And the same thing with electability, right? I mean, I think that the electability argument for Nikki was also an obvious contrast, but like every single thing she has tried, nothing has really worked.
But this is true for Haley and Phillips. They tried they both tried electability / ageism. without a clear, obvious tie to substantive difference. Dean Phillips, pass the torch. Pass the torch to do what? What is the next generation going to do that Joe Biden
Yeah.
isn't doing? Biden's a very interesting cat because he is super old. He's the oldest president in history, but he's always been very good at staying current. It's not like he's like clean energy. What's that? I haven't heard of what's a semiconductor. I have no idea. He's progressive on trans rights. He's 81 years old. He's progressive on trans rights. He stays current. He stays a little ahead of the curve on a lot of these things. So the pass the torch argument doesn't land because Biden's not performing like someone who is out of touch with current America.
Yeah. And the Republican voters are also out of touch. So so they're down with being out of touch. I mean, but Nikki could say pass the torch to someone who doesn't pay off porn stars. Pass the torch to someone who hasn't been indicted 4 times. Pass the torch, but pass the torch to someone who hasn't been found liable of sexual assault. But I don't know if that works. If those are substantive arguments.
I think you should have gone much harder. They all should have gone harder on sexual assault. I mean, it's crazy to me. I mean, even the Democrats barely talk about it.
Nikki said she hasn't been paying attention to it, Bill.
The verdict happened, if I remember correctly, before the Alvin Bragg indictment. Or it was early in the year. And everyone has always been dead silent on that, which I think is just, this is not even like, it's actually adjudicated. And people are
talking. The judge, I don't want to, caveats and all that, but didn't the judge say something to the effect of like, yeah, in other states, this would have been called rape. You know what I mean?
It's
something to that effect.
It's just a technicality that the label being used as sexual assault, but the judge is saying this is a finding based on evidence that he raped E. Jean Carroll. And again, if that happened to a candidate that wasn't named Trump would call that candidate a rapist. He would not hesitate to call that candidate a rapist. And no one's doing that.
Right? That alone would sink anybody else easily.
Yeah.
And yet that's like, I don't even know if that makes, I think it does make the top 10 list of Trumps, but there's a lot of competition for Trump's 10 worst things that we know he's said or done. Or, who knows?
So I do think that should have been prosecuted harder in the campaign. But that aside, scandals aren't, I think this is true for a lot of people. Scandals aren't enough to stop someone who people think fights for them. That is more important than anything else.
Wait, is that true for people, or is that true for today's Republican Party, who has a victimhood mentality and an inferiority complex? I think it's tribalistic.
I think that's human nature. If you think,
okay,
I think generally
this is why feminists stuck with Bill Clinton.
Yes.
Because even though he did what he did, he still has the right. He's our guy.
That's right. My favorite political slogan, Buddy Cianci, after being convicted, I don't know what the exact charge was, but he brutally assaulted a guy in his house, and was convicted, served jail time, came out, ran for mayor again. The slogan was, "I never stopped caring about Providence."
And you know what he did? I interviewed him once on my podcast. He had a book. Was it called Pasta and Politics or something? Yeah. Or am I getting that confused with
D'Amato?
A different I think that's former senator from New York. Anyway, he wrote a book, and I interviewed him about it. And as I remember, I think there was a contractor who came to work on his house, and he climbed up a ladder, and he was up on the roof, working on somebody's house. And Buddy Cianci pulled the ladder down, and wouldn't put the ladder back. Maybe I'm getting this confused, but anyway, he did some good stuff. I think they even moved the river, as I recall, cleaned up the town. But look, I'm willing to look the other way on the Prince of Providence. Maybe that's the name of the book.
Mm-hmm.
But the president of the United States is a lot more, at stake.
Yeah, and that's why I think properly labeling him a rapist in the primary, I think, would have been something that the candidate should have done. But they also had to say that Trump is bad for substantive reasons for what Republicans want to accomplish. Not that he isn't as good as we would like him to be, or not as competent as we want him to be, or there had to be something far more straightforward to say Trump does bad things for us as Republicans, as Americans. These are what those things are, and I would do those things differently. Otherwise, you're not going to dislodge who is a quasi-incumbent, because if the incumbent is generally in agreement with the median Republican voter, that's it. The incumbent's going to win.
I'm thoroughly depressed, but once again, congratulations, Bill. You were right. I hope you're happy with yourself. Have you ever thought that maybe you're the one somehow supernaturally causing these events?
So people were always attacking like you just want Trump to win, as if like anyone thinks that my tweets, my columns are going to have any effect on what Republican voters do. It's nonsense.
What if this is like the Death Note, or where you've got like you write a column and then it happens? I think I'd watch that
I don't
show.
know sort of paranormal capabilities. Look, the reason why I think there's value in doing this kind of commentary at all, because you could say, why this is all just for entertainment purposes. Just why don't you shut up and let the people vote, and why do you have to get involved in it? And like, look, that I'm not trying to say there's value in telling people to not bother voting because everything's preordained, but there's always value in trying to understand what is happening in our body politic, in our electorates, nationally, within the parties. I think it's good for us as citizens to understand that. It's good as politicians to know how should I talk about this issue or that issue? What should I put in the 20 reading poll data? Not just about the horse race, but about Democratic issue positions and sensibilities and such. And I could stitch that together in a piece. And almost every professional Democratic political operative told their candidates to do something different, and to chase Bernie Sanders and to chase Elizabeth Warren, to chase the far left policies, because that's where the mojo is in the Democratic electorate, which was just factually wrong, and they all got burned in the process. So people who do this stuff for a living can get trapped in echo chambers, and that's why there's value.
You don't have to convince me that we're heroes and that we perform a valuable public service. Go to patreon.com/Matt Lewis, patreon.com/Bill. Bill, I will say, like, I love, like, whether it's sports talk and commentary, going over the game film from last week and analyzing what went wrong. Or, I mean, my kids and I, we were driving around the other day with my wife, and my wife hates this, by the way. But we got into this conversation about the movie Groundhog Day. And I don't know if you remember, but Bill Murray, on day one, he's trying to leave Punxsutawney to go back to Pittsburgh, and the tunnel is blocked. I think the tunnel is kind of metaphoric here, but the tunnel, there's like a jackknifed rig, and he can't get through, so he goes back to Punxsutawney. And then who knows? He could have been there for 1,000 years. We don't know how many times he relived this day. But one of the things my youngest son brought up is, like, why didn't he ever try to leave Punxsutawney? Like, get up the next morning and leave town at 5 a.m. before the snow starts. Would that have broken the spell if he went to a different city? Would he have still woken up with Sonny and Cher playing and the bed and breakfast? So my kids and I are having this debate, like you and I have about politics. We're having this debate about Groundhog Day, and my wife hates it because she's like, all of your theories and you're overanalyzing everything. But like, I find, and my kids have the same, like, whatever gene, like, I find it just very fascinating to ponder these things.
Well, sometimes you don't want to overanalyze a work of art. You just want to enjoy the art.
Well, it is a work of art. We can agree.
And look, if you just want to enjoy the reality TV drama of a presidential primary and just be surprised by the outcome, have at it. But I think that candidates have to be strategic, and sometimes voters have to be strategic. I mean, if you're going into a multi-candidate election that is, first past the post, you have to think about, am I casting my vote in a strategically sensible way? And that requires understanding the nature of your party, the nature of the broader electorate, I mean, everyone has their own criteria that they use when they bring into a vote, but you hear this. We're going to hear this a lot with we're going to have third party candidates. I don't know how many states they're going to get on, but there's plenty of people are going to try to exploit the fact that there's discontent with Trump and Biden, and say this is a chance to have it. Don't fight the duopoly. You have other choices. Don't tell people you're going to waste your vote. But as just a matter of plain fact, we don't have ranked choice voting. We have not just a system where the person gets electoral college votes when they win a plurality in a state. And if there's no electoral college majority, the race gets kicked into the House of Representatives, where the delegate, we don't even know what number of delegations are going to be Republican and Democrat. So there's all sorts of uncertainties of what's going to happen based on this Rube Goldberg Democratic system that we have. So it's to narrow the choice to just vote for who you like. Don't let them tell you can't vote for who you like. Vote for who you like. Well, that's being purposefully unstrategic when the system demands you be strategic so you don't get an outcome that you truly hate. So you have to understand what's going on around you to be a citizen who performs at his or her maximum capability.
Amen, brother. All right. Well, we could go on, but we'll have a lot of Groundhog Days, a lot of cold winter, dark winter days to get into more politics. Anything you want to plug?
Well, check out my piece at the Monthly about how ageism flopped in New Hampshire. I also had a Substack newsletter for the Monthly yesterday, which was about the polling history of New Hampshire, which may feel a little outdated, but I do think it's still interesting history. Regardless, we do have some people have noted that the pollsters were off in a certain sense. They overstated Trump's margin, and I think it's actually one of the bigger gaps between polling average and actual margin. Although I'm not one to argue that means like they suck. They couldn't detect perhaps crossover votes that were baked into the turnout models that they had. But the fact they were directionally correct, I still think is pretty relevant. But if you check out the Washington Monthly Substack, you'll see all the history. And I haven't really seen anybody else put the history together the way that I did. So check that out.
Love it. Always smart to read Bill Scher. Read my postmortem on New Hampshire and Nikki at the Beast. Also, this past week, and just in the run up to with Iowa and New Hampshire, I interviewed Steve Kornacki, Mike Murphy, and David Frum on my podcast and on this YouTube channel, youtube.com/Matt Lewis. All of them are worth your time. I think the David Frum one specifically gets into deeper stuff than just the primaries. And so I would commend that to you. David Frum, always interesting and insightful. Whether you agree with him or not, always a great guest. So check that out, YouTube and or my Matt Lewis and the News podcast.
All right. Always good to talk to you, Matt, especially when I'm right.
Good talking to you.
And
here we go. I'm talking over you. I made it this long without doing that, and here at the end of the show, I'm going to botch it, but that's okay.
Till next week. Is Nevada next week? Do we have to do a rip-roaring Nevada analysis in the DMZ?
I don't know. I don't think the world is clamoring for us to do. Maybe we'll get John Ralston on the line or something. I'm not sure. I'm not sure the world needs our commentary on Nevada.
It's hard
At least we do pronounce it correctly. Anyway, we will be back next week talking about something. And until then, we will see you in the DMZ.
Take care.